In today's video, we are diving into the Scotch Opening, an easy and aggressive opening for white that opens up the position right from the start and puts your opponent under pressure right from the opening. This opening works for all levels from beginner to advanced. So let's begin. e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, and on the third move we are going to open up the position with d4. This is known as the Scotch game. Basically, it's much easier to play whenever you open up the position. If you are a beginner, there's always a saying that if you are a beginner, opening up the position will only make your play much easier because you're only having many natural options to continue the position. The light square bishop can come out, the dark square bishop can go out. It's basically open. The position is open, so it's much easier to play. So after d4, for example, if black just plays the move d6, trying to protect the pawn on e5, because currently we are targeting to capture the pawn on e5. So if black just pushes up the pawn trying to protect the e5 pawn, now there are already two ways for white to get a serious advantage. If you are an advanced player, you can simply push the pawn to d5, more space in the center, and it's much better. You can simply play c4 and you are having more space in the center. But if you are a beginner, I would recommend you to open up the position by capturing the pawn on e5, d cross e5, and simply trade off the queen. Sorry about that, that's the wrong move. Queen cross d8. If black captures with the knight, black loses the pawn. And if black captures with the king, we can simply develop the light square bishop. The king can no longer castle up. Our idea is to simply capture the knight and capture the pawn on e5. We would be a pawn up. So that's exactly what happens if black goes for playing the move d6, which is not a good move. If black goes for the main move and the best move, which is to simply capture the pawn on d4, we can simply going to recapture the pawn with the knight. And this is the main position of the Scotch game. After knight cross d4, black is having four main options to continue the position. Black can take the knight on d4, black can develop the bishop to c5, black can develop the knight to f6, or black can simply strike in the center with d5. First, starting with the most obvious way to continue the position with the black pieces, simply trading off the pieces. Queen cross d4, and now we can already say white is already better. Advanced players already know this, that white is already better, but for beginners I must tell them why white is simply better. Basically, white is having a strong pawn on e4, which gives white a more better space in the center. White's queen is well centralized on d4, which can't really be attacked. Why? Because black is not really having the knight on c6 to attack the queen. So that's the key reason white is already better in this position. For example, if black just develops the knight, we can push the pawn attacking the knight. It's not a great move. The bishop cannot be moved from the f8 square because whenever the bishop moves, black simply loses the pawn. If black just tries to push the d6 pawn, the bishop on f8 is simply a bad piece once again. So you see, it's already very hard to play with the black pieces. The best move in this position for black is to develop the queen to f6, which makes sense. Black wants to trade off the queen. But now we are going to keep the queens on the board with queen to c4, attacking the pawn on c7. Let's say black pushes up the pawn, and now our idea is very interesting. We first develop the knight on c3. Black now finally develops the bishop. The idea is to develop the knight and castle up. Our idea is a bit insane. We are going to first develop the bishop to e3, knight goes to e7, and now we are going to castle on the long side. The king castles on the king side, and now we are going to play the move g3. What's the idea? We want to play the move f4, e5, attack the bishop and the queen. After g3, for example, if black also tries to push the pawns on the queen side trying to attack the white king, we can simply go back with the queen to d3, attacking the bishop twice. The bishop have to move to e5 maybe. The idea is to simply attacking the knight. Maybe. Black wants to develop the pawns for white, but we don't really care. We can simply continue our development with bishop g2. The threat is to play the move f4, e5. For example, if black just goes for capturing the knight on c3, we can happily trade off the queens as well, and we are having this particular position where white is already better despite being materially even. How come? Basically, white is having the bishop pair advantage. I do agree, white is having a bad pawn structure, but the pawns can't really be captured. The pawns are not really that weak as we are having the king to protect all the pawns. But black is having some major issues. Black's all dark squares are extremely weak. Black is not really having the dark square bishop, and we are having the dark square bishop. The bishop on c8 can't move because the d7 pawn is hanging. So for example, if black continues with rook d8, the idea is to finally move the bishop and somehow continue the position. Maybe the idea could be to strike in the center with d5. But now bishop to c5, taking advantage of weak dark squares. The knight is attacked, the knight have to move to g6, but now simply f4. With the idea of e5, rook h to e1, you can already sense white is having more space on the king side in the center, having bishop pair advantage and very easy to play with the white pieces. That's exactly what happens if black goes for capturing the knight on d4, which is not the great idea. For example, if black continues with d5, striking in the center, makes sense. We simply capture the pawn, the queen have to recapture it back, and now queen e2 check, which is a very quiet move in the position and a bit, if your opponent is seeing for the first time, he will get shocked. After queen e2 check, let's say black is having two main options to continue the position. Bishop e6 is the best move and bishop e7. For example, let's start with the most natural way to continue the position, which is bishop e7. The idea is to simply develop the knight and just castle up. Basically, after bishop e7, now we are going to jump with the knight to b5. The idea is to simply capture the pawn on c7, attacking the king, the queen, and the rook. So the only way for black to defend the c7 pawn is to go back with the queen, defend the pawn. But it's not enough. Bishop f4, we are going to develop our dark square bishop, attack the pawn on c7. And guess what? We are simply winning. Knight c7 is unstoppable and white is completely winning in this position. So going back, that's exactly what happens if black develops the bishop to e7. If black develops the light square bishop to e6, which makes a bit more sense. But now, it's not like white is simply having a better position after knight cross e6, queen cross e6, we can even trade off the queen. And we are simply better. Why? White is simply having the bishop pair advantage. Black is having a weakness. White can already say white is better. We can continue with bishop to b5. The idea is to simply capture the knight, making black's pawn structure even worse. Black have to castle up. We can simply take it up and just develop the knight to d2. For example, knight f6 and simply castle up. You can ask me what's the idea of white, how should white try to continue the position. So basically the knight on d2 will go to b3. The pawn will go to c3, the rook is going to go on e1, putting pressure on the pawn on e6, and it's very easy to play with the black pieces. It's very easy to play with the white pieces. Black is having long-term issues as the pawns are very weak, and we are going to have a lot of fun to play with the white pieces, and basically we are going to play for two results, either we win or we draw. So yeah, going back, that's exactly what happens if black plays the move d5, striking in the center. For example, now coming to the main moves, starting with bishop c5. Developing the bishop, simply developing another minor piece, attacking the knight on d4. So now we are simply going to develop the bishop. Once again, our idea is also same. We want to develop all the minor pieces as soon as possible, and also defending the knight on d4. Now, for example, if black just continues the position like developing the minor piece with knight to f6, it's already a blunder, and after knight cross c6, we are attacking the queen. The pawn have to take the knight, but after bishop cross c5, white is simply a piece up. That's completely winning. Going back, so the main move in this position for black is to develop the queen to f6, adding another attacker, attacking the knight on d4. So we simply push the pawn to c3, defending the knight. Now capturing the knight would not be a great idea. I can simply capture with the pawn, having full control in the center. The knight is going to come on c3, white is already better, and also having the bishop pair advantage. Going back, for example, black continues with knight e7, which is the best move. We continue with bishop c4, simply developing the minor piece. Both sides' idea is to simply castle up, and that's exactly what happens. And now the only minor piece black is suffering is with the bishop on c8. So to develop the bishop, black pushes the pawn to d6. The idea could be to develop the bishop to e6, or maybe to d7, get the rooks to d8 or to e8. Makes sense. But already after d6, we can claim that we are better. How? We can first take the knight on c6. Black have to recapture the knight and now simply capture the bishop. D cross c5 is a force move, and now black is having a bad pawn structure, double pawns on the c file. We are going to use this opportunity by pushing the pawn to f4, grabbing more space in the center and also on the king side. So after f4, our idea is pretty simple. We want to push the pawn to e5 as there is no pawn on d6 to cover the e5 square. The pawn goes to e5. For example, black just makes some random move. We want to push the pawn to e5, develop the knight. I'm just going to make some random move, get the queen in, get the rook in, and you can see how easy it is to play with the white pieces, and white is already better if you just follow the same idea. Going back, that's exactly what happens if black plays the move bishop to c5. Now coming to the main move in the position, what if black develops the knight to f6? Developing the knight, attacking the pawn on e4. We first take the knight on c6, b cross c6. D cross c6 is already a bad idea. We can simply trade off the queen. The king can no longer castle. We can develop the bishop as well. We can also push the pawn to e5, and we can already claim white is better. Black have to capture with the b pawn, but now e5. Attacking the knight. For example, black is having two ways. Black can either move the knight or play the move queen e7, pinning up the pawn. First starting with the move knight to d5. First moving the knight. We push the pawn to c4, attacking the knight. The knight have to once again go back, and now bishop to d3. We want to castle up as soon as possible, and thanks to the pawn on e5, we are having more space in the center. For example, black also wants to castle up as soon as possible, so black starts with a check. We cover it with bishop d2. Black trades it off, and black castles up. We castle up as well. We are already better in this position. For example, black is once again can have two ways to continue the position. Black can either strike in the center with f6, trying to open up the rook or the queen, or just develop with rook e8. First starting with f6. It's already a blunder. Queen h5, simply going for the weak h7 pawn in the position. Black can play g6, but it's not really going to happen. We sack the bishop. Black takes it back. We give a check. The king goes to h8, and now simply rook e1. Rook e3, rook h3 is a force mate. Black can't really stop it, and that's winning. You can also go for another idea with rook e4, rook h4, and basically that's completely winning for white. Going back, for example, if black continues with rook e8, developing the rook, attacking the pawn on e5. Once again, the same idea, f4 striking in the center, protecting the pawn, opening up the rook. Very easy to play with the white pieces. Like, it's a very natural idea. Queen goes to h5, the knight goes to e4 to g5. The king is very weak. There are no pieces to defend the king, black king. So basically white is completely winning. Going back, for example, if black goes for finding the best move in the position, queen to e7. Makes sense. The pawn is pinned. We play the move queen e2. Now we are definitely preparing to capture the knight on f6. The knight have to move. We push the pawn to c4. The knight goes back, and now we develop the knight to c3. And now let's say black develops the bishop to a6. The idea is to simply capture the pawn on c4. And by the way, that's the best move. We push the pawn to b3, defending the pawn on c4 with the pawn. And now once again, black somehow wants to develop the f8 bishop. But how? Black pushes the pawn to g6. The idea is to put the bishop on g7, attacking the pawn on e5 twice. We develop the bishop to b2. Black develops the bishop to g7, and now f4 once again to protect the pawn on e5. So after f4, let's say black just castles up. Now to make the position even more interesting, we are going to castle on the long side. That's the best move, and after a long castle, at the first glance, the position is a very bit too complicated. But if you think carefully and deeply, it's very interesting to play with the white pieces, and white is already better. How? First of all, the bishop and the knight on the queen side is already a bad piece. Restricted by the pawns, the knight and the bishop both. The bishop on g7 is also bad at the same time, as the pawn is simply blocking the bishop. Whereas our pieces are very happy, the rook is opened up, black's pawn is also weak. So for example, if black continues with f6, trying to open up the position, striking in the center. Yeah, makes sense. And now, already e6. We sack a pawn. We go for sacking a pawn. Black is having two main ways to continue the position. Black can take with the pawn or with the queen. First, let's start with d cross e6, capturing with the pawn. Now black is officially a pawn up, but our idea here is we are not playing for the material, we are playing according to the position. We strike with h4. The idea is to play the move h5, h6, blocking up the bishop. For example, black is rook a to d8. We play h5, Black tries to trade off the rooks and plays the move e5, trying to strike in the center, opening up the center, because black is already a pawn up. And guess what? First h6, we can grab more space on the king side, and eventually in the end game, the h6 pawn would be the main pawn for white, as it's a very strong pawn. And after bishop h8, our idea here is to keep black's pieces as bad as possible, so we push the pawn to f5, another pawn sacrifice, only in order to keep the dark square bishop bad. And now the knight can simply jump in with knight to e3, attacking the pawn on f5. Very easy to play. The black's king is extremely weak. Maybe we can have a rook lift, the queen can come into the game. It's very easy to play, and white is already better. Going back, for example, if black captures with the queen, we can trade off the queen and just play bishop e2. White is once again a pawn down, but according to the quality of the material, white is simply winning. Like, not winning, but at least better. Why? Black is having double pawns over here. Our idea is to develop the bishop, put the bishop on f3, attacking the pawn and the rook. The bishop and the knight and the bishop on g7 are already a bad piece. The e6, the c6 pawn are extremely weak. The bishop goes to f3, the h rook goes to e1. Our all pieces are in perfect harmony. The knight can go to e4 to c5. All the pieces are perfectly placed. We are very happy to play with the white pieces, and that's exactly how you should play whenever you play the Scotch Opening. And with this, you have successfully mastered how to play the Scotch Opening with the white pieces. To master this opening even further, I would highly recommend you to watch the games of Paul Morphy, who was a very strong player, renowned in his times around, I don't know, maybe 1600, who invented this opening and got famous for how he used to play Scotch Opening in a very aggressive way. And obviously you can watch the games of Magnus, very top players, in order to master this opening even better. So that's it for this video. I hope that you guys have enjoyed the video. If you did, make sure to like, share and smash that subscribe button. I'm going to see you soon in the next one. Thank you for watching, and bye bye.